are rolling. We have a guest that is. Were you a former intern of mine, or did I just train you?
I think it was like somewhere in between. I annoyed you a lot, and you used to tell me to take longer rest.
Andrew Triana, who I've known probably since what year? What year did you start? Was it 2012?
I was going into college. So I think I went into college in 2012. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was like 8th grade going into freshman year.
Okay. So this fucking kid, he started off, I remember training him. He's like, oh, I'm a personal trainer. So, I kind of know what I'm doing already. I was like, all right, bro, like, no worries. Do your fucking thing. And then slowly but surely, this little dweeb of a kid turned into a fucking monster. And now you're a borderline fucking genius because of all the research, all the literature you've read. Do me a favor, start spitting out your resume right now. Tell us where you started, where you were, and where you are right now.
So it goes back a little bit. I started out really, really overweight. I lost like 80 pounds wrestling, ran into Mike. Mike turned me on to Charlie Francis. I went into college being aware of some really, really cool terms and concepts. When I got to college, I hit the books right away. My most proud achievement probably in like the first third or first half of my college career was they actually implemented a printer constraint system. So I used to print out entire textbooks in the morning before class and sit at the printer and not give a fuck. I printed out endocrinology textbooks, the entire Norman Deutsch series. I used to just sit there with my arms crossed and just watch that shit print. And eventually they implemented every page was worth like 5 cents. You could only accrue like $20 a month. But that deserves to be on my resume for sure. And I kind of got enamored with research along the way. I started going to grad school a little bit, and I was at that point really into allostasis and the concept of like decision making and how it can alter enzymatic adaptation in an acute span, and how it's really looking at environment. So I proposed a research theory, and the context was, it was like this guy's last year as head. He should have retired a decade earlier and was great in his time, but like, this guy was legitimately in like 70s. So I mean, like, no matter what you do, like, your hippocampus is starting to slip, man. I know it is. Like, it's not you, it's biology. So long story short, I proposed that in an overtrained male, with resistance training and a certain amount of hypoxia, you can push them to a point where they will literally preferentially go through aromatase-like functions at a higher than normal rate to make some downstream changes where growth hormones, a more specific analog to deal with the training damage of hypoxia and that myofibril coordination rather than spinal cord damage. He laughed at me. I took the pencils off his desk. I broke them in half. I threw them at the wall. I walked out and I quit grad school that day because that was the only reason I wanted to go. I was like, you could read, and like, I'm already kind of smarter than these bastards. Like, I remember on my first day, but it's a passionate part of my brain. On my first day, the teacher asked everybody to name one enzyme in glycolysis, and every single person in the class got it wrong. So right then and there, I was like, oh, this ain't for me, man. So that disdain in graduate school is what led me to start doing education and coaching on a greater span. So I started the Performance Vibe. I started putting out like content and coaching people publicly. I think it was within like 2 or 3 years, I already had like double-digit Arnold winners and pro strongmen that I had produced, and women. Along that way, I started competing myself. I enjoyed it. I've been speaking a couple years after that. I've traveled to the US, the UK, Canada to speak. I did a presentation with a body in the UK where I'm embarrassingly forgetting the name of now.
UKSCA, could it have been?
No, it was a private group. There were whatever. I did a circadian biology presentation. There was like 5,000 people. It was like something to do with move. I'm sorry, guys, if you're listening or gonna be listening, but
it don't matter, man.
No one gives a shit.
So I've kind of been all over the place, but now I've gone from like that wide distal fish approach to coaching and helping out everybody to privatize systems with executives, athletes, and keeping my cohort very small that I intimately deal with. And I've kind of gone full on with like the neurological brain spinal cord education route on the side.
But you also have a supplement company too, right?
Yeah, so that's mainly for novel ideas and products that I've always wanted to be in circulation for the sake of not having to tell athletes to get so many different things at once. So like I've essentially created each product. There's 2 right now, but we have 2 or 3 more down the line. COVID ruined everything as far as manufacturing stuff. Yeah. But for example, the first one's called Max Uptake. And that's something I've always wanted to use because you can ultimately change the liver and gut dynamics acutely to increase absorption of X. And the beauty is I chose ingredients that favor CYP450. So that takes one entire subclass of compounds you can digest. I used chromium, cinnamon, and black pepper. So now we have leaving groups and chemistry attached, and we have the muscles from a cellular perspective attached. So it's kind of just increase absorption of, and that also includes food, obviously. Then I have like a neurological agent, which is we market as a pre-workout, but it's really meant for like vision, coordination, and neuromuscular junction optimization.
And what are the main ingredients in that neurological agent?
So it's pretty cool. It is a mix of Nupept, GPC, a little bit of caffeine just for like that standardized kitchen sink catecholamine approach. There's a tiny bit of huperzine in it. And I've specifically done a creatine methyl donation addition to that so that we can also alter what's going on from an energetic standpoint. Because the coolest things in neurology and exciting based performances come from that opportunity to draw from creatine stores, as well as that refinement of the nervous system. So I really think that it's just proper dosing and synergy of the ingredients, even though they seem simple, that makes it a nice outcome.
So what's the name of that product?
That is called Vibe Central. Both of them are available on Amazon, and they have like the Amazon's Best sticker on it, so it comes up at the top.
So Vibe Central. And now I haven't had caffeine in, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, whatever the fuck it's been. I cut it out. Once my anxiety started getting bad, I cut out the caffeine. But you had brought over a pre-workout sample, like a jar for me. And I didn't take it. I gave it to Ryan, one of my guys, and he says it's the best pre-workout that he's ever had.
That's awesome.
And he says he's not like jittery from it. He's not like, oh my God, but he's fucking laser focused in. He feels fucking good the whole time. The huperzine makes sense for that. That's interesting. I didn't know it was a cognitive performance. So why did you use caffeine for it then?
Just because I kind of created like a funnel-like approach to make each product. So I started out with like an environment I wanted to facilitate. Then I picked ingredients. Then I picked doses. And the final stage was, and this is actually something I got from Mike a long time ago. Your athletes are probably going to fuck something up. It's not the way you tell them or the way you set it up. It's what actually happens. Because I was one of those athletes that would fuck it up all the time. That I do exactly what was written, but it's how you do it. It's not just because you did what was on the paper. So if you give someone maybe some type of neurological aid without a tiny bit of stimulant, in my opinion, you have to assume that then they're coming to that supplement with already the, catecholamine excitation-based balances that you need to get the most out of it. Even if they're lacking in food or sleep or something, that's going to give a different response to something like Nupept. Nupept's actually an antioxidant. It's just very specific to the free radicals it targets cortically. And by altering free radicals cortically, you alter firing rates. But let's say the dose of Nupept was only meant to give you like an acute boost because that stuff gets potent quick. If you had more free radicals than I anticipated, you might not feel it the same, or it just could flat out make you feel different. So there's a specific threshold I wanted everything to work at. So I chose about 160 milligrams of caffeine because I figured that was a standardized dose that is going to be normal for most people grabbing any energy drink. And that's what I wanted to replace.
So the whole purpose of you adding in the caffeine was just to say, well, just in case you don't get stimulated before taking this, like you don't get your heart rate up, you don't get ready to fucking go, then this isn't going to have the effects that we wanted to have. This is going to replace the stupidity or the lack of knowledge associated with that.
Yeah, and then I figured it's a kind of in the middle. So even if you don't take caffeine too often, 160 is probably going to be less than like 2 milligrams a kilo or 3 milligrams a kilo for most people. So even if you're sensitive, that should be tolerable.
I have is nicotine legal? Are you allowed to add nicotine to any product?
I'm actually not positive. I think it might be controlled by the FDA.
Okay.
So I think it's legal, but I think you need to either have some type of, whatever bullshit certification or X to actually put it in something.
Okay. All right. So would you ever consider using nicotine instead of caffeine because it's got a shorter half-life?
Shorter half-life, I like the acetylcholine reuptake facilitation in that through the inhibition mechanisms on the negative feedback loop side. I think it's a great one, especially when you pair it with a choline donor, because then 1 + 1 = 3. But now we have to deal with connotation too, because we're talking here, you could say any compound name and we look at it from mechanism of action. What is it doing? The second, I've heard people say like nicotinamide, or not nicotinamide, niacinamide is like nicotine. It's like, that's literally a B vitamin, dude, just because it's got like the NIC, So there is a lot to that. And it's part of the supplement company. You could put together an incredible supplement, but let's say you put it under all the chemical names. People are going to think it's steroids.
Yeah. So you ever think about making it without caffeine and utilizing it literally as a cognitive enhancer, and then suggesting if you're making suggestions on it instead?
I was going to do that and make it a pill form and slightly alter some things.
Is that something you're still considering?
Oh, it's totally on the docket.
Yeah. I like that, because I think caffeine,
it's a lot. I don't personally do it.
Yeah. I think it's getting such a good rap for things that it really shouldn't. Like, I don't think it's as beneficial as people think that it is. And on top of it, that we're so fucking overstimulated on caffeine that another cup of coffee isn't doing shit to people. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost as if it's not even a stimulant at that point. It's literally just blocking the receptors that register fatigue. That's it. Rather than heightening you, it's just stopping you from being so fucking shot.
Yeah, I describe it as it's sympathetic nervous system replacement therapy.
Sympathetic nervous system replacement there. That's really interesting. Okay, I never heard of it like that.
Fucked my own system, so I'm just gonna replace it with caffeine.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So what's the mechanism behind nicotine then that would be more beneficial than the caffeine?
So it's different. So I think the best way to answer the question is by actually answering the mechanism of action for caffeine. So caffeine blocks adenosine receptor activity. And essentially what that says to the system-wide body is like, oh, that means that we're breaking down ATP for some reason. And that if we're breaking down ATP for some reason, because cyclic AMP is the trigger here, we need to dump norepinephrine and we need to dump all these adrenaline-like things, and that's what essentially gets it going. So you can, just by listening to me, even if you're not into this stuff at all, it sounds like a kitchen sink approach. It's like by doing X, we have a multitude of responses. Nicotine is actually very singular in that mechanism of action, acting on that acetylcholine receptor and agonism-antagonism portions of it.
Okay. So if I were to take caffeine, when I'm taking caffeine as the pre-workout, what are the benefits of taking the caffeine versus taking something like nicotine?
So the benefits of caffeine are difficult, and it's more of looking at it in the classification of the athlete. So the novice athlete who can't even stimulate a spinal cord in the first place, their first and last vertical toss are like exactly the same, and their rest time, nothing happens in between. That person can probably benefit from caffeine. But as you start to creep up that ladder of success as an athlete when it comes to skill proficiency and work capacity, it starts to go down because now you have less heart rate variability in between sets. You're already, as an adult, you just can't get your heart rate that high. So if you aim to get it high in the first place, but you're starting at a higher basement as well, just theoretically, your ability to do work is going to decrease. And that also goes along with now interfering with excitement and the phenomenological approach of things. If you've ever, Mike's an excited person, and so am I. If you take someone who's already excited and do more, is that going to really help at all? And you find that most athletes who are having like a shred and iota of care for what they do become passionate in the moment, even if they aren't, zoom people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I'm feeding this is because the mechanism of heart rate elevation with caffeine versus nicotine, my heart rate doesn't elevate with nicotine. The way that caffeine increases your heart rate is through like you said, the kitchen sink approach. The norepinephrine, the epinephrine starts getting secreted, but it decreases, in my opinion, it decreases cognitive function through the elevation of heart rate. So we just had on James Smith on, the thinker, and one of the things that we were discussing was the amygdala and frontal cortex, frontal lobe relationship. Whereas essentially, the higher the heart rate, the more inclined you are to recruit from the limbic system. The lower the heart rate, the more inclined you are to recruit from the frontal lobe. So if you're taking a stimulant that's going to elevate your heart rate, you're less likely to retain the information in the frontal lobe or to be able to recruit or utilize that for your problem solving abilities, because it's just making it that much more difficult. Whereas if I'm chilling on the deck, smoking a cigar, I have some of the best fucking ideas that I've had. My thoughts are going crazy, but my heart rate's chill. I'm chilled as fuck. Even though it's a cognitive stimulant, it doesn't seem as though it's impacting my heart rate as much. So where am I at with that?
I love it. I think there's two major points to defend that, to take it home as very, very real. I think one is that it's neurochemistry driving that caffeine-based heart rate response. And when we look at what happens when you make a decision, we have this frontal cortex that secretes dopamine, right? The greater the secretion of dopamine, what we see, especially coming from the substantia nigra, which is made up of two parts, the pars compacta and the pars reticula, which go back and forth at monitoring how fast these signals are sent. When they both go faster and more dopamine is just flooding through the frontal cortex relative to what is normal in that typical environment, a decision must be made faster. And of the decisions and behavior strategies you have in front of you, so to speak, as an organ, the ones with the most success from a socio-cultural and feedback-based perspective are most likely to be chosen. But we know with elite sports, decision-making is the caveat to being the best. And there are many, many micro decisions that can be made. And that analysis portion comes from the right amount of neurochemistry, like a not threshold phenomenon, more of a optimal base phenomenon. I mean, you don't have to pass the barrier. You want to be in the middle of the barrier. Mm-hmm. And by crossing it too much is when you make poor decisions, even if you quote unquote know the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I have guys that take caffeine before games. They'll take caffeine at halftime, whatever the fuck it is. And I just think it's fucking terrible. I'm like, number one, you don't need it. Like, oh, it's just, I'll have a black cup of coffee before my game starts. Like, why? Like, you have all these fans here. The caffeine's not going to get you more excited than all these fans. Number one, well, it wakes me up. Well, do a fucking extended warm up. Like, that's all you need to do. Do an active dynamic warm up. There's no reason for you to have to worry about getting stimulated. And on top of that, the half-life of caffeine is 7, 8, 9 hours. Now, if you have a nighttime game, you get home from the stadium at, I don't know, 11, 12 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock, and you took the pre-workout at 7, 8 o'clock, like you still have half the fucking shit in your system. You're not gonna be able to go to sleep. It fucks you.
A lot of it's also conditioning. It's sorry, Andrew. A lot of it's the conditioning too. I've got a lot of young guys. They're addicted to these energy shots, and they don't believe that they can play well because all of their positive experiences in playing have been post having one of these shots. So it's just this constant, conditioning reflex of just, I need to be jacked up on this caffeine. But you're right. These guys can't sleep. And then they need to take sleeping pills to get to sleep at the right time, then feeling groggy the next morning for training, and then needing, again, the energy shots to get them going.
And that goes back to what you guys were alluding to with the thinker. So that frontal cortex is going to pick with, what Brooker just said, what's had the most success associated with it. So maybe those couple times you took the energy shots, you had a couple big plays and your coaches came over, like, dude, that was awesome. And that night you went and got your dick sucked and it was amazing. And you slept like a baby somehow because it was such a good night. That's all going to be remembered and red hot long-term potentiation wise in your brain. And then you do it 2 weeks in a row. By the third or fourth week, that has now become a real thing for you to do, even though it's actually not paying you forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you suggest?
So if I wasn't intimately working with somebody and like I could pick out small little things, I would give yourself like 1 or 2 if-then questions to ask. Are you running out of gas at all? If you're not running out of gas at all, I would simply suggest a choline donor. So you could go nicotine, you could go like alpha GPC, CDP choline. That's going to give you just the bare bones extra of a neurotransmitter. It's very important in sport, which is going to be the essential neurotransmitter for contraction. It's going to give you extra like surplus. Pool supplies, chlorine for your pool, all the things that keep you allowing to play and going forward. If you actually think you have any performance detriments to look at, then you have to ask the next question is it a neurological phenomenon or metabolic biological phenomenon? And that's how I would approach it.
Okay. And so how would you differentiate that? Would that be like lack of focus towards the end of game would be sort of more neurological, and then sort of, I don't know, let's say heavy legs / like low energy as more metabolic biological phenomena? Is that how you would differentiate it in terms of symptoms?
Decision making and ventilation would be like the things I attribute to it. Was like, so if we can obviously see ventilatory dysfunction or stress, automatically metabolic decision making goes out the window. If their ventilation looks somewhat the same and their biology looks somewhat the same from I've seen them play, this is what they look like when they're fresh, but they continue to make poor decisions, maybe under pressure or the lack of pressure. In our job industry, it's super easy to get ourselves addicted to pressure. But if you see decision making based on context, then go with neurology as the issue.
So, negative feedback associated with the brain chemistry tampering. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very real. And it's funny, it's most obvious in athletes who cut weight of any sort. And it's actually a renal to brain phenomenon, where if we go even deeper, it's the second and third post cascade-like actions of norepinephrine and epinephrine in the blood and their impacts on kidney via the renin-angiotensin cycle. So what we see is, and it's really, really interesting to look at it from this way, you have the secretion of catecholamines, the amygdala is red hot, all this stuff's happening, right? It's easy to also look at it with cortisol and ACTH. These have triggers to be secreted again, to have a compounding effect. And we're looking at vigilance, right? So you have this visual field, you're in a vigil mode, boom, boom, boom. We have a stress response with this whole cohort of glucocorticoids and catecholamines, right? Through that first phase or that first tier of action, we do not see negative feedback loops having to do with noradrenergic inhibition or renal function happen yet. When we see them far extending their original half-life, that's when we start to see this. So the renal inhibitions, which are stemming from a neurological, base, are the metabolic, quote unquote, issues that have to do with this negative feedback loop. And noradrenergic inhibition is the neuron on neuron issue.
So what's the timeline you're looking at then?
So we're looking at anywhere beyond 5 to 6 hours of extended vigilant response. And that's one of the things that we talk about with caffeine as well.
So essentially, if you're just one of those fucking guineas that walks around with his fist clenched, looking around all day long, you're fucking yourself.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's funny because if a meal can disrupt that, but if you eat the meal in that like mode, nothing's going to happen. You don't have any blood in your gut to digest that shit anyway. And that's probably why those people tend to be like I don't respond well to carbs or fat or protein, like whatever their niche is. Type of people drink a lot of liquid meals and then binge at night, because that's when they finally get that, due to their sympathetic nervous system replacement therapy half-life finally comes down at 9 p.m. That's the first time they've had blood in their gut all day long.
What kind of methods are you looking at bringing people's sympathetic nervous system down if they're sort of these very chronic stressed people?
So the problem is, right, if it's supplement in, you almost have to supplement out to teach them what it feels like. Because I'm sure you've spoken to these athletes. They don't even know they're hyped up. It's like the meth head. It's like, why are you asking? Huh? Who's asking? Ha, ha, ha. You know? So anywhere from like KSM 66 ashwagandha to like a rhodiola to even just small amounts. And I like GABA, even though we all know it's not actually crossing the blood-brain barrier. But what we see is the desired outcome-based effects happen because there's some type of extrasensory portion of having the GABA in the blood, even though it's not crossing the barrier, that still speaks to other organs. So by looking at the suprachiasmatic nucleus, we see that there are time clock genes in the entire viscera everywhere else that are responding to things, you know, like light and like proteins in the blood specifically, even if they don't cross the barrier in the first place. It goes top down and down up. So that's my theory on how the supplementation works, because we know it works. If you take it, you get the effect, but it's not doing what we think it's doing. And that's how I think it happens. But you do have to show them, so to speak. Like athletes who don't ever feel hamstrings, the first time they've ever felt their hamstrings in their life is probably something very extreme, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or same thing with the ankle pulls, right? If you roll your ankle the first time, it swells up like a motherfucker, and every time after that it's just easier and easier. So let's go more into the negative, the robbing Peter to pay Paul effect. So when it comes to any of these neurological drugs or any of this neurological chemistry, what is the negative feedback associated with that? Because I mean, we have people that are loaded up on Adderall their entire life. Then when they become adults, and I say entire life now, Adderall's been out, I don't know, since before I was in college, before I was in high school now. It's been out for a long time. So it's been out 15, 20 years probably. So people have been their entire adult life on Adderall, but they also take coffee. They're doing all these things. What's going on chemically when you're constantly overstimulating and then now it's time to work your way off? You've dealt with things like this before, right?
Yep. So I alluded to it. The term is noradrenergic inhibition, but I'll describe what that really means. So the noradrenergic receptor is where norepinephrine and all these certain types, rather, of sympathetic ligands can bind. Now, I think we've all just kind of been misled with a little bit of bias in school because they skipped over it too quickly. But receptors are not stagnant in many, many different ways. One, receptors move after they've bound to their ligand. Two, the activation of the receptor influences the subsequent development of the receptor. And I'll say that again. And what that means is when you eat steak, you are more likely to like eating steak the next time. And that's what this receptor does. So if we have an X amount of norepinephrine binding, and let's say it's 3 days in a row, the next receptor that's coded for in because eventually the receptor dies, just like everything else in the body, the next one is going to be better, theoretically, at attaching to that amount of norepinephrine. But now it's like having a quota. So now if you go under that norepinephrine, we have issues. And if we go over that norepinephrine, we have issues. And that's the second reason noradrenergic inhibition gets nasty.
So what do you mean the receptors move?
This is really cool. So sex hormone receptors actually move the most. They do entire suicide sprints. And that's probably the best example I should start with, actually. But receptors are not stagnant. For example, we have door-like receptors, and these are called peptide receptors, and that's more of like a passing baton. Those do not move.
Facilitated transport, right?
Yes. But when we have receptor complexes, like the estrogen receptor complex or whatever have you, these massive, like thousands of kilodalton in weight complexes, they legitimately move. So for example, when we have testosterone bind to the testosterone receptor, it is going to gravitate towards the nucleus. And what's even cooler is and obviously it's not actually like making entire movements through the cell membrane, but it is approximating the same way mitochondria approximate towards intracellular lipid droplets. And it moves greater in athletes or humans that have more testosterone reception. So as it approximates to the nucleus, that is going to start and stop once the binding process is done. So once all the postsynaptic transcription factors from that testosterone molecule have been bound, or the multiple, because it's actually multiple molecules that bind, once it's unbound, it either dies or can return to its original place.
So it moves. Now, the way testosterone works is it goes freely throughout the cell. Like it can go, because it's a, phospholipid bilayer, fat goes in, no problem, right? So when it moves closer to the nucleus, what is the benefit of that?
Hormone response elements and all of these things that are bound to the receptor. So the receptor is, first, there are 3 variants, and there are also 3 domains truncated within the same portion of the receptor. So it's less of actual movement. And imagine it as you guys all know what chemical compounds look like, right? In 3D, we have projections. It's almost like a crane shifting its projection angle from here to here, and they are the response element bound projections. So what's actually happening is it's kind of oscillating or geometrically shifting and creating a decreased distance for electrical charges and photon and electron-based transmissions to get the receptor unbound. So think about it from this perspective. How would the receptor unbind itself otherwise?
I don't know.
Something has to happen, right?
Yeah,
there needs to be a catalyst for that event. Like you don't just bind and it's like, you done, baby? Like it's not just like waiting for the molecule to finish. Some type of transmission has to happen for it to undock, and that's what it is.
See, to me, I just don't. Now, once the receptor latches on, what is it doing?
So there's portions of that as well. So we need to begin transmission between the ligand and the receptor, and that's done via a mineral cofactor.
Okay.
After that mineral cofactor has begun, the receptor is going to send out signals for transcription factor movement. And that is the goal of every single hormone and ligand-based interaction with the receptor, is to elicit transcription factors thereafter.
Okay. And but where does it go from there?
It's actually catalyzed. So testosterone will then turn into the metabolites of testosterone. So in the receptor, or also along the way where DHT things begin, aromatase begin, it's almost like a bus center hub.
All right. We're going to talk more about this off the podcast because this is going to fucking bore the shit out of people. But I want, like, my brain man is like diving deep into it. I'm sorry, guys. All right. So everyone clearly knows, your fucking shit in regards to hormones, cognitive function, all that shit. But you had also made mention of the spinal response. Talk to me about all this.
Substance P. Not enough people know about substance P. But that's the whole pain world. But the spinal response, I think, is oftentimes just touted as, it is what it is. And it's just like this like tube that like takes electricity and like pokes other muscles. It's interesting enough that the spinal response is sensory information. So if someone has like, you have shit form, you can't do this right, that's a spinal issue. Unless you can't understand or manifest what you think is correct, that would be a cerebrum issue. But if you just can't kinesthetically do something, that's a spinal cord issue. If you can't produce enough force quick enough, that's a spinal cord issue. So I think it just gets, something that's forgotten about, and people just think it's like it just happens, but like it's a whole nother world to look at, and it is encompassed when we talk about the term nervous system.
So in regards to, let's say, pain manifestation, one of the things that we'll do with acupuncture is we will, and I shouldn't say acupuncture per se, but it's more orthopedic acupuncture and electroacupuncture therapy. What they're doing now is they're needling the spinal erectors to go down almost to the base of the vertebrae. And depending on what vertebrae you are, that's what nerve you're going to hit. And what you can do is you can almost clear the nerve root almost by hitting that nerve area and then going to the area that's problematic, and that's going to clear the signal by sending it with electricity. That's a spinal related issue, but that's not addressing the spine itself. That's still just one stem. How are you going about addressing the spine?
So addressing the spine is really interesting because, one, it's only based on assessment. What we have to do is we have to either look at from, did we make a cerebrum change transmitted through the spine that created end outcome change, or did we see differences in end outcome and then look at the spine in order to make a cerebrum-based change? So what I mean is chronic pain. I learned the most about this because this is all in the field type learning. Like there is no place to learn this stuff. At least I'm talking about in this very moment. I saw this paradox in elite female athletes who had a little more hypertrophy than normal, not much, still within standard ranges, but could produce a gross amount of force. I saw them coming up with chronic neurological based back pain again and again and again. And I didn't see correlations between each of them with anything besides the pain and besides a fear aversion-based response. Excuse me. Long story short, I noticed that if I did a chronological protocol of cold temperature, meditation, NuPept, intervention of exercise that they could already tolerate, over the course of a week or two, we would see a attenuated negative effect. Continuing the progression on the exercise, annexing the temperature, and then annexing the meditation, and finally annexing the NuPept over time of 2 to 3 months, alleviate pain in all of them. And there was only about 4 to 6 that I can think of at the moment. And I wasn't sure how or why it worked. It was out of desperation. It worked for 1. I applied it to number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. It continued to work. What I realized was, similar to what acupuncture is addressing with Mike just said, there was some type of, and I don't want to seem redundant with receptor phenomenology type stuff, but something at the receptor was just quote unquote not right. It wasn't functioning properly, whether it was calcium issues, whether there was tone, whatever. We needed to decrease the fear aversion response in a state of exercise that the participant wanted to associate with and facilitate that. And over time, it happened. So my theory for that is, we know pain is apparent when substance P binds to the nerve Mike referenced and it comes out in the area distally or just elsewhere. That is what pain is, and when you feel it from a neurological sensation. What I was trying to do was, instead of getting acute change, get chronic change by slowly decreasing the amount of substance P that was able to be released.
So I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I read somewhere that, I forget what it was, but 80% of lower back pain can be cured with an SSRI or an antidepressant or something along those lines. Now, in cases like this, people that have anxiety, depression, anything like that, they can and will experience pain associated with it. So is there any possibility that the heat, the cold therapy, the meditation, these were all things that were helping in that would help aid in depression and anxiety, and those were some of the things that actually reduce the back pain?
Absolutely. If we were to put some tests and characteristics and qualities on paper, extrapolating out how long or how they got there, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an injured chronic pain athlete and a depressed athlete.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Substance P and all these things that are associated with it. And actually taking a step back, an easier way to explain it is the triangle between glutamate receptor, and GABA.
Yeah.
If you get that triangle and then let that umbrella trickle down to everywhere, if we're going to have a glutamate receptor that's changed in a way that attachment of a sympathetic, ligand or excitatory ligand still continues to produce null response, and that just happens everywhere system wide, that is what it's like to be in chronic pain. Because when you have chronic pain, you get increases in adenosine. You get GABA dependent changes to the glutamate receptor to purposely put you in a depressed state. Now, I'm talking about somatic depression. Maybe we can't extrapolate the same data for like bipolar, schizophrenia, or anything, but when it comes to light and suprachiasmatic nucleus based somatic depression, it looks exactly the same from a neurological perspective as someone that's in chronic pain.
Dive deeper into substance P. What
substance P? Yeah.
Go. I'm sorry.
Literally stored in a quanta in the spinal cord acutely in all spinal cells to be secreted as a rapid response anticipatorily to stop something. And that is ultimately the, amino acid to the protein of pain.
So it is a reflex or almost like PTSD associated with previous injury to prevent you from going in those ranges of motion. Now, in my experience, anecdotally, obviously, but what I've noticed with a lot of back issues is, again, like you said, I suppose that we could chalk it up to substance P. These guys and girls are really fucked up. They're in a lot of pain because they think that they can't do certain things. So what I do with a stretching routine that I kind of, came up with is I have them go to ranges of motion that they're comfortable with. And then we recruit in those ranges of motion recruit musculature minimally in those ranges of motion. And then I have them, it's PNF, but then I have them extend it through reciprocal inhibition. It's going to relax the agonist, the one you're trying to stretch out. That recruits it. Now, all of a sudden, they're feeling okay in an extended range of motion. Have them, again, contract, relax, extend it even further, and go through a whole system, a whole global change of fascia to help re-educate them on what they actually are supposed to be feeling. Now, substance P is a chemical, right? How is a physical alteration changing the secretion of chemicals?
They come in quanta or spurts. So it's like, and because it's anticipatory, I love that you use the term re-education because that's really what it is. Mm-hmm. They get the, I'm not quite sure, Mike. Boom, that re-education response. One quanta gets inhibited. And then 5 minutes go by, they stand up. Whoa, I'm okay. Second quanta gets inhibited. Then third. And then maybe it only comes back like that night when like they bent over sideways to get the remote. So maybe there was 12 to 15 quanta inhibited. Then next time there's 18 and 24, let's say, mm-hmm. You already preemptively described it with the ankle roll thing. That is an adaptation. Got you.
So essentially, the more this is no different. This is exposure training. But yeah. What is telling the body to go back again to say, hey, let's go back to our old way of being, this old motor pattern or this old memory that we have of, me bending over to the side hurts, even though 20 minutes ago you felt fucking great. What is preventing them from being able to, hey, one and done treatment?
I guess it's a phenomenology response, right? It's a belief and it's an actuality. So it's like, how come, We see athletes who shouldn't have been able to do X and they did it. It's the same answer. It's like, because sometimes you do have that one and done treatment in those like special moments where it's like, this guy just came to me. He was so broken down. We had a connection and it just happened. And we both just sat there and we were like, oh, what? And like, it stuck, So to a degree, that's my belief, because if you want, so I view the spinal cord as like the Wild West shooter. He's got like 2 guns in his pocket. It's like, bang. It's a quick response based on data, right? So if you want to take maybe the nihilistic approach of, oh, I'm just destined to be in pain, whatever, then if you run with that for a minute, that means you're also believing your spinal cord sucks at making decisions. And because we can't impact our spinal cord directly, I refuse to believe that. I'm an optimist. So I'm like, okay, what I'm going to believe then theoretically is it's your ability to inference, rationalize, and believe data.
So in my opinion, pain isn't real, right? Pain is something that we just fucking made up, or we make up to ourselves. We are interpreting the data that we are taking in throughout the world. And then for whatever reason, our brain decides to label this as fucking ouch, right? But if we can change the view on things, if we could change our perspective on things, then pain would cease to be, or at least long-term pain would cease to be an issue. How would you go about tricking yourself all day, every day to being out of pain?
So this is a multi-layered approach, right? So we could talk about potentially brainwashing people with like specific music, benzodiazepines at the right time, like maybe cocaine at the other time, but that's not what we'll probably talk about. Realistically, what I think you'd be looking at is it's micro doses of what I said about the cold meditation exposure again and again every time pain comes up, and then slowly eliminating them as pain disappears, and also practicing a lot of little things along the way. So for example, maybe your pain response is exacerbated by your lifestyle. Maybe it's exacerbated by your relationship, and that needs to synergistically and behaviorally change as you're attempting to change the pain diagnostics and performance.
Andrew, you're the fucking man. Where can everyone find you?
So you're only recently allowed to find me again. I've been gone for a year. I deleted everything. I went into hiding. Not actually, but I needed to reformulate ideas. I needed to decide what direction I was at. I was kind of just like stuck in a rut. Plus, you guys know about the job change. So I was like, you know what? This is just not the right year for social media. But now it's Go Superbrain on Instagram. That's the website. And from there, you can find everything else you need to get me at.
Go Superbrain.
Yep.
All right, bro. Thank you. We're gonna have you again. Have you on again. I'd wanted to have you on fucking last year, and I completely forgot to fucking invite you. I even told you that too. I'm such a dick,
dude. So we're like that. We'll talk for not talk for a year, but then it's like as if nothing ever happened.
All right, let's end this.